Okay, it looks like we have everything ready to go. So Mayor Rachel L. Smith, whenever you're ready. Looks like I lost your video here.
Sorry, I had to let my dog in.
Oh, that's okay.
Otherwise he stands at the door and lets me know.
Knocks.
Yeah, doesn't have audio yet. Just want to make sure we have her fully connected.
Yeah, she's not responding. So I'm.
Oh, there we go. Commissioner McGriff, are you with us? Can you hear us? There she is. All right. Commissioner McGriff, do you have audio? Can you hear us? You with us?
Of course.
Okay. I said you were connecting for a while, so we were just making sure we had you. All right, so I think we're ready.
It's the headphones. They take a while. Once I put them in, they like to do other things and take a long time.
Okay, I certainly understand. All right, so it is about 7 p.m. on July 13th, 2021. This is the Oregon City work session meeting. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Ms. Riggs, will you please call the roll?
Yes, absolutely. So Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Adam Morrow.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
And Mayor Rachel L. Smith.
Here. All right, the first item on our agenda is future agenda items. Mr. Conkle, do you have anything to narrate for us this evening?
Well, I think next month we'll be bringing back the cost recovery policy and discussion for Parks and Recreation. That'll be the second work session on that item. The deferred maintenance assessment we'll be bringing forward. The Park Place sidewalk and tree discussion, and then a follow-up on House Bill 2001 for August.
All right. I was looking at the additional upcoming items and I was wondering about that ethics training. Is that on there because we're supposed to be having ethics training as a work session, or it got added as is it a discussion item?
We've historically gone and we've done ethics training with the commission. If it's something you'd like to do, we can certainly do it. If not, we can remove that.
Well, I was just wondering. So it actually is it is training. It's not we're not discussing ethics training.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, it just appeared on that. I didn't remember seeing that before, and I was just asking for some clarity on that. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just a quick question. I see that on the September 7th meeting, the Willamette Falls Trust and Willamette Falls Legacy Project updates. Did our relationship with Willamette Falls Trust not terminate on June 30th?
Yeah, we were going to bring that in July, and then we had, the partners meeting with the Willamette Falls Legacy Project. We've got it on there as a placeholder. I could see it depending on how the partners meeting going, that may not be necessary.
Well, I think it's something the commission wants to discuss about our ongoing relationship with the trust, but if it has to wait till the 7th, I don't see it not happening at all, but we'll see. If I could fit it in earlier, I would, but I know how these agendas go that are stacked, so I won't push that point.
Okay.
I think at a at a future partners meeting, that will be part of the decision by the partners as to the future relationship with the trust, which would dictate any considerations by the partners and what comes back to us for whether it's a contract or And if it is a contract, what does that look like or not? So I don't think it's been resolved yet. I think our next partners meeting will probably help provide some direction on next steps will be with them.
Yeah, that might make sense where the duties of the trust are more defined and then come back to the city commission. Thanks.
Right. Because right now, I think that's where the questions are, is what their
Me too.
and deliverables, and how does that relationship change as a result of the request from the tribes to allow the trust to be their representative.
Agreed.
Anything else from the other commissioners about our upcoming items? Okay. All right. Well, then we will move on to our next discussion about the Geologic Hazards Code revision. Mr. Lewis, are you going to provide an intro?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Commissioners. Good evening. We thinking about stacked agendas. This evening is stacked with public works items, so we've got a slew of those. This first one is about geologic hazards and our geologic hazard code. It's kind of the last item in our public works code changes that we need to move through. It's been to the commission a couple times, and each time it's we've been redirected on kind of desires. So I see Dr. Scott Burns, and I see Josh Wheeler is up, and Josh has been carrying the load on this one pretty much. And so he's going to continue to do that with the help of Dr. Scott Burns. So thank you for your time.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen with a little presentation.
Okay. And while you're doing that, I will say welcome to Dr. Scott Burns. Welcome to being a guest with us tonight. I'm sure there will be some questions for you, but so just wanted to say welcome. And
Welcome back.
It's always fun to talk to Oregon City, so I love it.
great. All right, Mr. Wheeler.
Okay, so hello, good evening. You all know me by now, Josh Wheeler, the Assistant City Engineer. And as you heard, John Lewis is with us as well as Scott Burns of Portland State University. I'm going to be giving a presentation, which is mostly going to be talking about slopes. And our goal tonight is to determine the criteria desired by the City Commission to be included in the final proposed code amendments. And at the end of this presentation, I'll be requesting that guidance with the hope of going toward a first reading of an ordinance in August 4th. And so I'm going to do the entire presentation, and then myself, John Lewis, and Dr. Burns will be available for any questions that the commission has. And I've provided the code and a version of this presentation. I did some last minute updates earlier today to Dr. Burns as well. And so as he has had time, he has some knowledge behind that. So just as a reminder, the concept of reviewing this existing code and recommending revisions started back in October of 2019, and it continued through 2020, and most recently was discussed May 2021. And the outstanding issue, as staff understands it, is the criteria for the definition of a geologic hazard with respect to slope. A geologic hazard is defined in code as an area that lies on a historic landslide deposit and its buffer, as well as an area that contains 25% slopes or greater with its buffer. The goal tonight is to determine whether to retain the 25% as current code states and staff recommends, or to reduce that criteria to either 20, 15, or 10. Previous presentations provided the picture on the right. And that picture shows red, which is 25% or greater, orange, which is 20%, yellow, which is 15%, and green, which is 10%. The black outline shows the mapped landslide deposit areas, which often correlate to that 25% or greater area. This slide shows that the slope criteria has been 25% or greater for quite some time in recent history. And it's proposed to remain that way, at least recommended. But what role does slope play in the staff review of geologic hazards and development regulation for geologic hazards? As a reminder, slope is regulated in Oregon City in the following ways: that 0 to 25% slopes have no regulation. Properties within 25 to 35% slopes, including their buffers, they're buildable, but they're regulated through a type 2 land use decision, require a geotechnical engineer, and usually require a reduced density and disturbance as well. It also includes a minimization of cuts and fills. The process generally includes the developer hiring a geotechnical engineer, paying for a pre-application conference, doing a development review, and then going through an approximate 6-month-long public process. Properties of 35% or greater are only allowed to be impacted with minimal development, usually a single home, which must substantially minimize the density, disturbance, and cuts and fills. The city may not prohibit all development on private property. The process is the same as that for the properties with 25 to 35%, the pre-application, the geotechnical engineer, et cetera. But in general, disturbance of lands with 35% or greater slope should be avoided and are discouraged. However, we have realized over time that while slope is easily measurable, easily understood, the reasons behind landslides in Oregon City have been related most often to historic landslide deposits, not the slope. We talked a little bit about this in the May work session. For the information on slope, the picture on the left shows all slopes within Oregon City, and the picture on the right shows all landslide deposits within the city of Oregon City. Only the city limits. At least within the red line on the right, it's the red or pinkish line is the city limits. Not surprisingly, landslide deposits, quite often the big orange splotches on the right, correlate to where the steep slopes are on the picture on the left. The picture on the left, what you're seeing is green being 0 to 10%, yellow 10 to 25%, orange 25 to 35%, currently regulated, and the reddish pinkish color are slopes that are 35% or greater. So how does this all come together at a staff level? If a property is mapped as a geologic hazard, a slope, or a landslide deposit, and the mapped area is being disturbed, it triggers a type 2 land use review and starts with a pre-application meeting. Staff then provides the requirements, which is generally, again, to minimize those cuts and fills, as well as reduce the density and disturbance when code requires. The current code that we use today, a property with 25 to 35% slopes is only allowed a maximum of 2 dwelling units unless that area is half acre or less, and then it's allowed only 1 dwelling unit. Also, for those 25 to 35% slope areas, the disturbance area is maximized at 50% of that area or 4,000 square feet, whichever is less. So if you have a 1 acre site fully with 25 to 35% slopes, they can do 50% of that area, which is a half acre, which is around 20,000 square feet, or 4,000 square feet, whichever is less. So in that example, a 1 acre, 25 to 35% slope parcel is only allowed to disturb 4,000 square feet. Areas of 35% or greater are to be avoided unless it makes the parcel economically unable to develop. But current code does not consider the existing landslide deposits in the density and disturbance calculation. Therefore, properties like Forest Edge Apartments would be able to build on the flat area and avoid the slope area, but would still be at risk of sliding due to building on top of an existing landslide deposit. So changing the slope criteria today would have very little impact to what they could actually build today. It's a landslide deposit that would impact that, which is why staff is recommending adding landslide deposits into that density and disturbance regulation. The next 2 slides provide the current impacts and additional impacts on properties within the city limits of Oregon City. And I want to be clear, this is within the city limits, and I'll explain outside the city in a second. This data only considers, yep, I already said that. Okay. The list on the left shows the number of lots impacted by a geologic hazard. First of all, there's 12,415 lots in total in the entire city. Out of that 12,000 plus lots, 1,767 of them exist on slopes 35% or greater, 2,173 at 25%, and so on. The list on the right shows the amount of acreage impacted by landslide deposits. Those numbers, as you see, there's 646 acres in total that are impacted by landslide deposits. And then when you add the slopes in addition to the 646, there's 388 additional acres impacted by 35% slopes, 618 acres additionally impacted by the 25% slopes, and 20% and so on, 826 and so on. What you should take from this is today's code for density and disturbance only impacts 618 acres. The code that we propose, which includes the landslide deposits, adds 618 to 646, and a little over 1,200 acres is what we would be regulating and reducing the density and disturbance on. If you wanted to go down to 20%, then that's an additional approximately 200 acres. And I believe I have those numbers on the next slide. So I've said the information on the left that code currently is at 618 for 25% or greater slopes, an increase of 646 for those landslide deposits. But if the commission would like to reduce the slopes, here's the impact that you see on the column on the right. 208 additional acres would be impacted at 20% slopes. This is above and beyond the 646 landslide deposits and the 618 for 25% or greater. So above and beyond that 1,200 plus acres is an additional 208 acres. If you went to 15%, that would be 529 total additional acres, which includes the 208. And then if you went down to 10%, that's an addition compared to the 25% we currently do of 1,212 acres additionally. Earlier today, we received public comment about the urban growth boundary and the urban reserve area, specifically in the Holly Lane area. And so to address that comment, I'm sorry I was not able to provide this in your packet because the comment just came in today. But we wanted to be able to provide you with information on this. And props to the GIS department, Chris Dunlop, who was able to get this information out in a matter of hours today after that comment came in. The picture you see here shows the area of concern, or what we're calling the area of interest. UGB standing for urban growth boundary. That's the area of the city that currently is available for annexation. And then the urban reserve area has to go through additional processes to be able to become part of the urban growth boundary and part of the ability to annex. And that's the urban reserve area in yellow. Here's what those areas look like in kind of a map picture. The purple line of the picture on the left is the urban growth area. And if you look at the picture on the right, you're looking at that same picture, but with geologic hazards as of today, today's code. The reddish and pinkish lines are the 25% or greater slopes with their buffers. And the orange that you're seeing sneaking out upon some of that area is the landslide deposits, which, if we approve the code as we have proposed, would additionally be regulated. The urban reserve area along the Holly Lane area is shown in the picture on the left in the purple shade. If you look on the picture on the right, that is attempting to show the urban reserve area with the landslide deposits and the steep slopes. And here are the numbers that we're talking about. The previous slide with the urban growth boundary, the UGB, that area of interest is 427 acres. Current code and the code we are currently proposing with 25% or greater slopes and landslide deposits would impact 240 of those 427 acres. If you desired to change the code to 20% slopes, it would only add an additional 20 acres. If you wanted to increase that to 15%, it would add an additional 47 acres on top of the 240 acres. Happens to be 27 more than at 20%. So not a major impact of changing the slope. Urban reserve area is 696 acres, the area of interest, not the entire urban reserve of Oregon City, but that area of interest, 696 acres. 566 of that would be regulated today with the code that we have or is now proposed with the landslide deposits. So significantly over half of the area would be regulated. If those slopes were changed to 20%, it also would only have an additional 20 acres of impact. And if reduce that down to 15%, it would be a total of 56 additional acres compared to the 566 that would be with the code we're proposing. So we wanted to provide the information to you so that you could understand further from the public comment that had concerns about this area. But to finish up, there were a couple other questions in the last work session that we did want to touch on. And so this diagram that you see on the right shows in red the current code impacts to the annexed portion of the Park Place concept plan area. The red is what would be currently impacted by today's code with no other changes. The yellow shows the additional impact if the 20% slope was chosen, which has been a number that has been tossed around. And so we wanted to show you what that additional impact was. The acres on that, there's 17.51 acres in the red. There's an additional 10.37 acres in the yellow. A total almost 92 acres is what that Park Place concept area is made of. However, any change in code would only affect the concept area if the application for development occurs after code is adopted and is valid. The developer anticipates an application soon, and thus it is unlikely to be effective for this portion of the code. They have told us that they may be applying in July, and if we continue on the path that we're on, code may be adopted and in place and usable by about the end of September. We also wanted to let you know about trees. That topic also came up. A tree removal within a geologic hazard zone area is regulated when 25% of the tree canopy within the geologic hazard zone is requested to be removed. Typically, one tree will rarely meet that criteria. And I'm showing two examples here. On 139 Barker on the left, you'll see a parcel that is about half encompassed by a geologic hazard, the yellow shaded area. If a quarter of that yellow shaded area was proposed to remove the trees, then the lot is regulated and the applicant must go through a type 2 review. The picture on the right is a lot that's fully encompassed by a geologic hazard, and this happens to be Pearl Street. If one tree, the entire property lies within the geologic hazard. If 25% or more of the tree canopy were removed, so a quarter of this lot, then that removal will be regulated and the applicant must go through a type 2 review. However, one tree would be likely not to cause either of these to trigger a review. And the picture on the left, the trees that are in the front yard that are not part of that geologic hazard have no regulation on them with respect to geologic hazards.
Hey, Josh.
Yes.
Leave that slide. Who is doing the calculation of that % canopy being removed?
I do that calculation on behalf of the city, yes. That's my role.
Okay, so if a request comes in, the city staff do the analysis to decide whether or not a permit is required.
Correct. We look at the drip line, we draw polygons, we do a calculation to determine if it's 25% or not.
But do they have to pay for the permit in order to get you to do the, no, you'll do assessment?
We do that assessment for free.
Okay.
And then that determines whether or not they have to go through a geologic hazard, which makes them decide whether or not they actually want to remove the tree.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mhm. And so in summary, staff recommends no change in slope and the addition of landslide deposits to the density restrictions. So if there are no further questions on these sections of code or previously reviewed sections of code, we recommend proceeding forward to the August 4th, 2021 meeting, City Commission meeting, to adopt an ordinance for revisions to this code. If the City Commission decides to change the slope from 25% to something less, a new public notice will be required using the Measure 56 format. And once the entire public notice period is over, then staff could bring proposed code changes back to the City Commission for that different slope criteria. And so tonight we are seeking direction from the City Commission. And Scott Burns, Dr. Scott Burns, is available for any comment on our code, this presentation, or any other questions you may have, as well as staff. These are the 4 options we came up with. The third one being, if you want to change the slope, what would that number be? And so we're now here to listen and answer questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Commissioner McGriff.
Mr. Wiseman, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm good. I am interested in knowing what the process and procedure would be for us to expedite this.
When you say expedite, you mean adopt immediately?
Sooner.
So
Immediately could be sooner.
Yeah. There's a notice that has gone out. You can adopt, avoiding going out to another Measure 56 notice would be the best way to adopt it sooner. My memory is this portion of the Public Works changes hasn't had a public hearing, right? Public hearing yet. And Joshua will let me know if that's wrong. Assuming that's the case, get it on your next agenda. Holding the hearing and adopting it as it is would be the fastest way to get it into effect. You could do some things, as you know, typically a ordinance requires 2 readings and a 30-day effective date. Both of those can be waived by the commission if the commission so chooses. And you could have 2 readings at 1 meeting and have it go into effect immediately. That would be assuming you don't have any changes that don't go out to that require a Measure 56 notice. To the extent you do, one option may be to adopt it as it is and come back with another ordinance that would make those changes to it as well. One thing to keep in mind as well, if you remember Measure 49, Measure 3749, there is a forward-looking portion of Measure 49 that may have some impacts on this. There's only one case out there about it, and that involves an attempt down in Eugene to subdivide a property, and the Court of Appeals said that subdivision is not a use of property and therefore doesn't entitle someone to Measure 49 relief. But that's just something out there. To the extent there is a claim, there might be something where the commission has to choose whether to compensate or waive any newly adopted amendments, and we can get into more detail about that if you'd like. That's kind of a bit of a rambling answer. I hope it answered your question. And if you have anything further, I can talk about it or get something more specific to you. But if you want it to go into effect, hold the hearing and have the 2 readings as quickly as possible.
We've had public hearings on this package, though. We're saying that this particular piece of the package didn't officially have a public hearing?
That's my understanding of what's happened so far. And I'm seeing Katie nodding her head as well. That, it's one process, but we've kind of said, all right, we're only doing this piece now, and, this piece hasn't had a public hearing.
Right. I know where Commissioner McGriff's going with that, and I support where she's going with it. Commissioner O'Donnell.
So again, a question for Bill and for others. The incorporation of the slide areas, that's new, is it not? But why does that not require the posting and delaying the thing, whereas a changing of the percentage slope does?
My understanding is that the original Measure 56 notice went out and said, this is what we're going to do to these new properties. Now we're changing what's going to happen. And to the extent those changes either impact additional properties or have greater impacts, that's really where you get the requirement for the revised Measure 56 notice.
So did our original
That is
notice
correct,
include the incorporation of the slide areas?
I'd look to Josh to answer that.
The Measure 56 notice that went out is the code that's proposed today, which did incorporate the slide areas,
Okay.
but at the 25% slope as well.
And the second question is something I thoroughly think is overused, but we've often declared an emergency. Can we do that?
Yes.
And what would that entail? And how would that impact the timeline?
And I always have to go back and look at the charter to make sure I get this right. But essentially, you would have to have unanimity to have two meetings. Is that right? You know, and this might be one I look at Katie again, but essentially the two key pieces are, one, having both readings at the same commission meeting instead of separating by two. And then the second is just declaring an emergency. And I don't believe you need unanimity for that, but I'd have to go back and take a look and confirm that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Katie, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if during the first reading there is not a unanimous consent, then it would be a 30-day period before it went into effect.
Okay. All right, so just to reiterate, part of the reasons we asked Dr. Burns to be here was because there were outlying questions about the use of slope, the percentage, and I think whether or not the landslide deposits, using that as a criteria, was really getting at the heart of the matter for protecting our residents and future development on properties with great slopes. So I'm hoping I hope we have some questions for him since we arranged this and waited on him and for him to be here. Commissioner McGriff.
Why don't we go ahead with, if anybody has any questions for Dr. Burns, I may, but I'm still making some notes to myself here to make it sound good.
Go ahead.
I'll ask a question that referred to I thought the Kaczynski letter that was submitted was very thoughtful, and it referred to the Salem approach on these type of matters. Is the doctor familiar with that, and does he have any comments on that approach?
Dr. Burns, you're muted.
So Salem was one of the very first cities that actually took into consideration landslides. First of all, Josh, great presentation. I really enjoyed it. You have to realize that Oregon City is way ahead of the game with landslide delineation and taking that in as a geological hazard compared to all cities across North America. Everybody goes to the slope angle, but we as geologists know that you can have a low slope angle, but if it's an old old landslide, it can reactivate. And with your ordinance that you have got, if it's on an old landslide, then it has to be looked at. And that is so good. And so the slope angle, I'm supporting the city at 25% right now. But then all of the other percentages below that, still, it will kick into it because of a landslide has been mapped there. We don't want to create another problem like Forest Edge Apartments, which I have been following since 1992. And so the most important thing of this whole thing is if it's on an old landslide deposit, it needs to be reviewed. And I think that is very important.
Is there any consideration for soil conditions or propensity for liquefaction?
Yeah, you have to realize that liquefaction is most common around rivers. So generally on flat surfaces, and you got to have the parent material, which is generally sandy parent material, but you need to have a high groundwater table. Most of your slopes are not going to be having that. So liquefaction is not a super problem that we have on slopes. It's more around rivers.
Thank you.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, Dr. Burns, it's a pleasure to see you again. The last time that we were together in a hearing was the hearing for the Newell Creek Apartments. And I know you know what happened with that. And so my real concern is that both of those things together, to me, will make Oregon City safer. I would not like to see another Trillium Park Estates or Newell Creek Apartments thing happen to Oregon City. And I am for, and let me clarify this, I'm not disbelieving or begrudging anything that the staff has to say. I understand why you're driving to the hoop for what you'd like, but I'm driving to the hoop for what I think is best for Oregon City, and I want to see the percentage lowered. However, I think that I read some of the Salem thing, and I think that the landslide deposits is something that we should have had in there all along. I'm wondering if there's anything else that we are missing that could be added that would give us more protection, because I don't really believe, but let's just say that I have a gut feeling that we have places in Oregon City that should not be built on and probably are not buildable. Now that is for a court to decide if people want to get into that whole thing, but there are places where we should not, under any circumstances, be issuing permits, because we know what can happen. And I guess part of what I'm concerned about is, even though, Josh, I understand your professional expertise, sometimes, one tree in the forest can cause a problem. And you know how I feel about trees, and particularly when I see slopes getting, denuded, that's the first thing that comes to my mind is, oh my God, what's happening to the soil there? Is everything going to start falling off? Or if we get, I don't want to see an Oso, Washington happen here. So there's a question involved in that, of what I just stated. So I just think more is better.
Dr. Burns, do you have any comment?
It ends up being more work for the city, but a question back to Josh. And so if a piece of property is like, say, on a 10% slope, but it's on a landslide deposit, it has to be reviewed, right?
Correct.
And so the most important thing of this whole thing is that you are delineating old landslides, and we have the ability to map them because the leaders in the United States are from here in Oregon. Bill Burns, one of my old students with Ogami, has testified before with you. That is the key thing that is there. Above the 25% slope, then it's also kicked in too for non-landslide deposits. But the thing that I am always really concerned about is it could be a 10%, 15% slope, but if it's on an old landslide deposit, it can possibly be reactivated. And the Forest Edge Apartments is a good example of that, Newell Creek Apartments. So I think that you're taken care of in that. And Commissioner McGriff, I agree with you. I'm always concerned. And you guys are leaders nationally and internationally by stepping out and saying, if it's an old landslide deposit, it's got to be reviewed. And then the percentage slope, 25% slope is still fairly flat. I mean, it is amazing. And I don't think you're going to get your bang for your buck by going down to 20, because if it's a landslide deposit, it's going to be taken care of. That's the key thing that I think we've got.
So is it either or both?
Landslide deposit plus 25%.
So it's not just, so if it's on a landslide deposit and it doesn't matter what the slope is, are we reviewing it?
Correct, Josh, right?
Sorry, Josh, you just switched corners from me.
Sorry about that. That is correct. That there's, and what I wanted to clarify was a geologic hazard in Oregon City today, without any revisions, is defined by a landslide deposit and a 25% or greater slope. We're adding to the code is that when we talk about density and disturbance, when I talked about that 2 dwelling units per acre and the 4,000 square feet of disturbance area, that's what we're changing. That because in our code right now, yes, you have to go through a geologic hazard, but you don't have to follow any standards for density on top of a landslide. You could build Forest Edge today, and you can take that slope down to 15%, and they will still build the exact same thing by code. But if you put the landslide deposits in for the density and disturbance calc, the slopes don't matter at all, because the size of that landslide deposit and its buffer, which is 200 feet, will encompass all of those slopes. And that's why the data that I'm showing shows that even today, if we add in those landslide deposits for the density and disturbance calc, you'll cover most all slopes because of the buffers and where those landslide deposits already are. There's very few additional properties or acres you're actually going to be further regulating.
Okay, so I'm still a little confused. So you're saying that it has to be both, or it's one or the other, or both?
So today's code.
No, I'm talking about what we're proposing.
What we're proposing, both.
So you have to have both, or can you, so if I have a piece of property and it doesn't have it, let's take the slope out of it, but it sits on a landslide deposit, am I going to be reviewed?
Yes, 0% slope with a landslide deposit, you will be reviewed and regulated not only by a report, but also by density and disturbance.
Okay, so then let me get example number 2. So let's say I have 25%, I have whatever slope, let's just say it's 10, and I'm on a landslide deposit. I'm still getting reviewed?
Same exact regulation.
So let's say I'm not on a landslide deposit and I have a 25% slope.
You will still get reviewed. If you're at 24, you will not.
That's what okay, that was my next question. If I'm 23 and a half, I'm not.
23 and a half and no landslide deposit, you will not.
Okay, so what you're saying is if you have a landslide,
Well,
you get
let me clarify.
Okay,
Because 25% slopes have 50-foot buffers, so therefore there is a little play in there.
okay, that was where I was going with what about the buffer? Okay, so what you're telling me is that with the addition of the landslide deposit, it's going to get reviewed no matter what.
Yes, you're approximately doubling the regulation.
And so if it somehow or another magically hits all of the ding, 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 slope, whatever, it doesn't matter, it's still going to get reviewed because of the landslide deposit.
Yep, it just has to hit one of those criteria.
Okay, so then my second
Proposed code.
involving, this is going to be a Tony question or a Bill question. I'm a little concerned about the type 2 because I think that public who is interested in this is not going to totally understand the type 2. It's a review by staff with a notice saying this has gotten reviewed. If you have comments, you need to get your comments in. Correct?
That's correct. Type 2 is a staff decision with notice and opportunity to comment.
Okay, and that's still the 14 days?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Dr. Burns.
Thank you for the chance to come and talk to you. You guys are doing something very, very special, and the bottom line is protecting people. I have visited many houses where a house has moved down the hill on a landslide or been hit by a landslide, and you have to tell them that insurance does not cover it. And they lose everything. And what you're doing is being proactive and saying, we are concerned about building on this piece of property, and you have a high chance of possibly reactivating the landslide or being hit. And so we are saying, don't build here, or at least have certain considerations. And the density is one thing. You guys are doing great stuff, and I laud you for this.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
So for Josh, I picked up on a passing comment. Does the buffer zone vary with the percentage of slope?
No,
Okay, I thought maybe that's what you said.
it's
Well,
a,
quite
it's a
honestly,
50-foot buffer.
Pardon me?
It's a 50-foot buffer with all
Okay.
slopes, 200-foot buffer on the landslide deposits.
Well, I understand. I respect the science. I mean, that being of that nature myself, I also know that we as elected officials are conservative in our protection of our population. I remember the forest edge things. I think about the super saturation of the soil by the 96 rainfall. And I think about the conclusion we arose on forest edge simply because we thought we were going to lose if we went to LUBA anyhow. So it involved putting in additional wells to desaturate the soils. Even if we moved to the 20%, it really didn't impact the urban growth boundary significant at all, according to your chart. The only thing that going to more preventative measures does is allow for more scrutiny. And if someone chooses to build on those lots, they have to take maybe additional measures to make them buildable, is how I see it. Is that a fair statement?
I think you're losing density though as well. So the density requirement cutoff, if you're less than 25%, if you're R10, you get 4.4 units per acre. If you reduce down to 20 and you put the same density cap on there, you're going to lose that density availability on the 20 to 25. So that would be the significant difference, is the reduction in number of assumed units per acre on that 20 to 25% slope.
And what is that reduction in density from 4.4 down to what?
Josh, are you down to 2 per acre?
2 per acre.
Yeah, I think in terms of point load on the soil is why I was considering it. All right, thanks for the information.
Yeah, and I think the bigger, while at R10, it's not that big of a difference. When you start to get into the R5s,
Yeah,
there you start to see the significant delta
yeah.
between the zoned density that exists and the cap of 2 per acre.
But would an R5 still be capped at 4.4 per acre? That's going to use almost 50% of your land mass anyhow.
Well, no, if it was high, dry, flat, right, you're roughly 8 point something units per
Okay.
acre at R5, and you'd be down to 2 per acre. So you'd be losing 6 per acre, roughly 6.5.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner McGriff.
So since the past is the past, let me ask the hypothetical question. If we had had landslide deposits in our code in 1992, when I was reviewing these Newell Creek apartments, even though we followed Dr. Burns's recommendation as a staff, would that property have been able to be built to the density it is today?
No.
So there you go, Dr. Burns. You were 100% correct, as we knew. Thank you. That helps me in making.
Okay. Any further questions? So thank you to Dr. Burns for being here to answer our technical questions and providing some, I think, reassurance and helping us through the scenarios and to Mr. Wheeler also for going through those scenarios. I think Commissioner McGriff was good at running us through all these hypotheticals to see how our code applies. And I guess just for clarity's sake, it sounds like if a technical review is done as part of the type 2 process, essentially what we haven't said explicitly is that that technical review will provide a set of requirements for the development that is being proposed for that piece of property in order to try to mitigate any potential hazards or concerns on the piece of property. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, and that's why it's considered a staff review, because we are essentially relying on a certified technical professional to provide that criteria that the developer then has to meet in order to develop on that piece of property.
Yes.
Okay.
We
All right.
Also, aren't we also doing a third party, Josh, in most of those? A
Yes.
third party review.
The city uses a third-party consultant as our geotechnical reviewer.
That's right.
So there's actually 2 geotechnical engineers that get used. The one for the private developer, the applicant, and then ours. So you have 2 different engineers trying to come to the same conclusions. And we are usually a little more stringent than the consultants because our consultant works for us and their consultant is working for them. Yeah.
Duh.
All right, Commissioner McGriff, we're gonna wrap this item up.
Okay, so I want to, we're not voting, but I want to make a recommendation that I feel that this code is of utmost importance to the health, safety, and welfare and well-being of our community. And that geotechnical and geohazard areas to me are an area where we need to take extra caution and make sure that we are doing it better than we have done in the past. Information we have today, and I want to strongly recommend that we expedite this as quickly as possible. I do not want to wait for 2 readings. I want to get this adopted and into code so that we make people aware that we are very serious about this, that we take the welfare of our community seriously, and that we do not want to have any further damage from unnecessary construction or building or anything in these areas where maybe, they shouldn't be built on. And I think that we have an obligation to protect our community in this way. So that would be my suggestion to staff as you've got 4 options. So sooner the better for me.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, that's keeping with the staff's proposal, so not changing. We wouldn't need a Measure 56 notice. We'd be moving forward with everything we've already noticed. It sounds like it is possible to do a first and second hearing at the same meeting to declare an emergency, get this moving. I am in support of that. I guess is there general consensus from the commission that's what we want for staff to bring back to us and plan for at our first, I think it's our August meeting, right? Our first August meeting.
Can't do it any sooner than that.
I think it was noticed for that first.
John shaking his head up and down and side to side. So
Mr.
Well,
Lewis,
My recommendation when we talked about this before was the August 4th meeting was, yes, when it was noticed and when we can get it to you. I mean, I think our commission reports for the 21st were due yesterday. So yeah, August 4th is accelerated and noticed.
okay, well, I would like to, if I could, I'd do this and wave my hand, but
so pause there though. You mentioned staff report as being a reason. I'm only concerned really about the notice at this point, because I think that's the trigger.
Right.
Was it noticed for August 4th?
That's my recollection. Laura is on. Is that your recollection as well, Laura?
let's have a fact, not a recollection.
Amen. I'm with you.
You're
Yeah, you're
muted,
muted,
Laura.
I'll have to double check on the date before I speak.
Check away. So I know that Josh and John know, you know, how I felt about this because I've been through this, been there, done that, and I'm just concerned. So I am going to make a leap of faith and back down a little bit from my original stance because the first time we saw this, the landslide deposits were not part of the equation. And after I looked at these further versions, let's just say I'm a little further down the road. I'm not 100% there, but my desire to get this in place is going to outweigh that. So I hope that I'm not going to, in 10 years from now, go, oh my God, I was on the commission. I should have gotten that slope lowered.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I agree with Commissioner McGriff. I toyed with lowering it to 20%, but it would appear that if we want to do first and second readings concurrently, we have to have a unanimous vote of the commission. Is that correct? And I think if we move away from anything other than what's positioned, we won't get that. So I think it's more important to have this in place expeditiously. So I'll support it as written.
Well, and we would have to renotice to the additional property owners if we were changing anything. We've
Right.
covered our bases with what we've proposed. Ms. Riggs?
Yeah, I was just gonna quickly pipe in here just a minute because we did bring a public hearing of the Public Works Code Amendment Package Number 3 to the Commission on June 16th. And we continued that until the July 21st meeting. So unless there was some sort of public notice that went out separately from that, that specifically had a different date on there, I think we can have it on the July 21st meeting, but that's going to obviously be up to the city manager and staff to research and confirm.
And I want to confirm that there actually was a hearing held and it wasn't continued without allowing people to actually testify.
We did allow people to testify, but it was a request for a continuance. There was no one there to testify.
All right, so how about staff?
Okay, Tony, I'm waving my.
Talk about it.
Yeah, can we,
Out staff or commission.
I think we understand the direction is to bring this back as quick as possible. We'll go back and look through the minutes to see when this was a notice for and forwarded to. And if we have it before the end of the meeting, we'll let you know. Otherwise, we'll follow up with an email.
Okay, yeah, you can let us know if it's going to be the July meeting, great. If the soonest it can be is the August meeting, that's fine too. Whatever works for ASAP. First and second hearing, trying to get it moved as quickly as possible. I think we've kind of beat this one to death and covered all of our bases. So the public hearing or discussion or presentation staff report piece shouldn't need to be elaborate or anything really new. So
It's pretty have it.
yeah. All right. So with that, and in the interest of time, I think we should move on. So thank you to Dr. Burns for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
All right. So we're going to move to discussion item number 3. This is the water ballot measure update and discussion. Mr. Lewis, are you introducing this or Ms. Nelson?
Right. Miss Patty Nelson is on, as well as Mr. Clark Worth from Barney Worth's and Associates. So they're going to take it from here.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Commission. Let me get my presentation up and running.
Patty, you're going to need to speak up or get closer. We can barely hear you.
That's okay. Let me go take off my headphones. Hang on. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Better.
Okay. All right. This is what I get for not being in the office. Let's see here. Here we go. And where did you go? Hang on. Good gravy. Where's my share the screen?
Should be at the bottom in green.
Oh, there it is. It's a little different this morning. Okay, here we go. Thanks, Katie. All right. And now we'll try this. There we go. Now do you see my
Perfect.
presentation, hopefully? Okay, so we, back in January, way back in January, I came and we talked about our water rates and our water ballot. And we discussed having something on the ballot for the voters to consider in November. And so since then, we have contracted with Barney and Worth, who has been helping us with community engagement. So what we want to do tonight is really provide an update and then talk about our next steps. So in the presentation, I'll review our capital improvement projects that we are needing funding for. Some lessons from the past that I want to just refresh on. Talk about water rates and voter approval. Why do we need their voter approval and for what? A community engagement. Clark Worth will be speaking on that. And then looking at the road ahead and then talking about the ballot measure that's coming forward. So as a reminder, our capital improvement projects were adopted in our amendment to the master plan in January. There's $81 million of capital improvements. And I think an important thing to highlight is that $58 million of that is SDC eligible. So that's 72% of that cost. So we've already passed the SDC increases. Those are in place and were effective July 1st, but we still need the last piece of the revenue, which is the water rates. So learning from the past, this is something that, I told John today that I went through and was looking at the old master plans. And I was surprised to see there's a number of projects that have been in our master plans for a number of years. And the reality is we have not increased the rates to really fully fund the capital improvements. So we've been making the improvements we need and the immediate need, but I think last time we talked, someone mentioned, it's kicking the can down the road. So we're kind of up against a wall here. So what does that mean? It's really deferring improvements. And what that does is it increases our risk to our citizens, risk to our ability to be able to deliver the services, the water to our citizens. And with the recent, last year was, we really experienced some tough situations, wildfires, we're seeing that again. The ice storm took out power for 3 days. So we were really reliant on our reservoirs. And I think we were down to a couple feet of storage in our storage tanks. So I think we've kicked the can far enough. And the commission, I was really grateful because I heard loud and clear that you want to fully fund our capital improvement program. And that's so important. So the last piece is the rates. So what we need now is funding, which is, I said 47% of the 5-year million. Sorry, got lost on my topic. So for water rates, just highlighting, when we talked, we had the FC, we had the rate model that we looked at. There was a number of different scenarios, and the rate model that we were going forward with was the debt option. So that was a 4% rate increase for 6 years. And after that, it would go back to the 3% limit. The debt financing is for $38 million. So none of that has changed. But we need voter approval because of charter limitations. So there's a few charters that affect us. Charter 58 requires voter approval for any rate increases over 3%. And then we have a couple sections in our city charter that refer to debt, one specifically regarding bonds and one is just indebtedness. In terms of timing, the commission was really sensitive to the difficult year that the citizens have had this year. And instead of looking at May, which we were originally looking at, we looked at deferring it to May 2021. And then community engagement, we talked about how important that is. And we're so grateful that Barney and Worth has joined us and has helped us in this endeavor. So I'm going to turn it over to Clark.
Thank you, Patty. Introducing ourselves, and when I say we here, I'll be talking about my firm, Barney and Worth, Inc., but also DHM Research. And I want to mention that that is Oregon's premier opinion research firm. And both of our firms worked on the 2013 ballot measure that Oregon City passed. A couple of things I'm going to cover, basically what we've been doing and where we're going. And the two topics are opinion research and what we've learned from the opinion research that has happened up to this point. and public education and the need for public education going forward. The key takeaways, I'm going to start with the key takeaways because we're going to go through some of the results, but the key takeaways here, I'm going to put right up front. And the first thing that's important is awareness is low, that water is not a top of mind issue. And I'll talk more about that going on. That's not unique to Oregon City, by the way. Underground infrastructure is the least acknowledged of the infrastructure issues. In fact, some people don't even think it is infrastructure. They don't count it as infrastructure. Second point is, without information, there's little support for a rate increase or for Oregon City using debt. The third point is that we can change that with education. We have learned through the opinion research that education changes voters' minds. We also learned that the rate increase plus debt is the most popular option. So if we just ask about a rate increase or we just ask about debt, we can do better with voters by talking about how those things can be combined to make the projects affordable. And finally, leadership is a key. And it's going to be very difficult for the reasons that I mentioned above to pass a measure, either of the measures, without leadership and robust public education. I'll hit on all of those points in a moment. The opinion research, what we conducted were three things, and then we also took a close look at the 2020 community survey that Oregon City had commissioned. The things that we added to that were focus groups of likely voters, randomly selected likely voters who participated in 2-hour discussions, stakeholder interviews conducted with some of you in the meeting today and some other community leaders, and then a telephone survey of 200, again, likely focusing on likely voters, that the kind of people who would be at the polls in November. And one of the really important things that we look for is, are the results consistent across these different methods that we use? So if we're talking about the focus groups, and you can see the smiling faces in the screenshot from the virtual focus group, or the telephone survey, or the community survey that was conducted in 2020, all of the results from these different methods were very consistent. So we're not scratching our heads about where folks are. Looking at the challenge of community engagement here, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. Yeah, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. The starting point, going back to that 2020 community survey, is that when we asked people about water in the survey, and one of the questions asked there was, service by service, how satisfied are you? And water is among the top for satisfaction, 69% satisfied or very satisfied. So that's very high, but a couple of follow-up questions are more disquieting. Question asked about services that should receive more attention. Water was only 16% of the choice compared, for example, to street. So water isn't even in the first tier of needs that people saw some reason to be spending more attention for. And then finally, and a really telling question, the participants in the survey were asked if they'd be willing to pay more in taxes or fees to repair or replace an aging water system, which is kind of what we're talking about here. And the response there wasn't very heartening either. It was 40% yes, 36% no. And those are not the kind of numbers that you pass a money measure on. The couple of the challenges of community engagement here, one of the challenges is that we have to pass 2 ballot measures. The attorneys have looked at it and decided, well, we really need, in this case, there are 2 different charter provisions. We need to deal with them separately. And that has the opportunity to lead to confusion. 2 ballot measures can lead to confusion. Should I vote for one and not the other? So the way that challenge is addressed is one, that the measures must be linked in voters' minds, that it has to be a single idea that you create in communicating with the public on this. And then second, the wording of the ballot titles is extremely important. Coming up with very clear. One reason for that is when people go to the polls, 80% of the people who vote on a ballot measure have never read anything on the ballot measure other than the ballot title that is on the ballot when they vote. When I say go to the polls, when they pick up their ballot and look at it, that for 80% of voters, that is all they know is what they read in that ballot title. So the wording there is extraordinarily important. One of the things that we tested, and we'll talk about this in the focus groups and in telephone survey, was how much. You recall that community survey didn't even mention an amount, but without an amount, didn't fare that well. So in this case, we were talking about some amounts, and we'll talk about how we did it. And a lot of the ballot measure language is in percents. The charter amendment can't increase more water rates more than 3% per year without a vote. We're talking about percentages, but what we find is that people understand the dollar amount. So 6%, 7%, that might sound, it's a lot more than inflation, might sound like a big increase, but when you bring it down to a dollar amount, 88 cents, $1.17 a month, around 10 to 14, 11 to $14 a year, that's a little bit more understandable. And we'll be able to see people's reaction then is different doing it that way. We ran through a series in the telephone survey. We ran through a series of questions. And what we do is we ask people right up front, will you support this? Kind of like the community survey. And then the second thing that we do is give them tell them more about it. Tell them about the problems in the water system. And then we run the same test again. Say, now what do you think about the ballot measures? Go back to the first one, if you would, please. And then we do it again a third time. They get still more information. We run it again a third time. The first test is shown here. And what we see, again, the green on the left-hand side, those are support. The red in the middle, those are opposed. And to explain the chart here a little bit, because it's got percentages all over it, flying all over it there. Beneath the percentages, beneath in the white, beneath the line, are the rate increases that we were talking about. So it's 6% plus debt, or 7% as a couple of options that were tested in the telephone survey. We tested lower options in the focus groups as well. And the numbers above there, the 38%, 24%, these are the amount of support, or in red, opposition. So you can see for the debt plus borrowing, which I mentioned in the outset was the more popular of the options, 36% support and 48% opposition. Again, not very heartening numbers, but actually not too far off the numbers that your community survey had. And then if you flip it there, after public education, we saw there's a significant difference. And when I'm talking about public education, in a telephone survey, the entire telephone survey took 10 minutes. So there's not a lot of public education, but just from finding out a few more details, and from finding out more about the problems, more about the solutions, considering what some of the benefits might be, you can see how the numbers swing. So that 36% support for the debt and 6% goes to 57%, and the opposition shrinks accordingly. Also, one thing that happens here, interestingly, is the 20% or so is 16% actually in the don't know column gets halved in the process with that education. So a lot of people just scratch their heads about this, change their minds in the course of discussion. So you can see the power of public education. We also tested what would be the reasons why, go ahead in the next slide, what would be the reasons why people would support the ballot measure? And we have a very good fix on that from the telephone survey, from the focus group, but also from the telephone survey. And some of the items that are mentioned there are that risk factor that we have experienced just in the past year, wildfire or the threat of wildfire, major storms, and more recently, concern about drought. The idea that some of your customers might run out of water during the summer months, that all customers aren't created equal when it comes to water distribution. We can't serve all customers equally, and there might be some areas that get hard to serve as we have less water. They also responded to the kind of the big picture, which is making sure that Oregon City can provide safe, reliable water to the next century. And finally, as I mentioned, we found out that if we talk about the actual dollar amount of rate increases, how much more are we talking about, that they respond very well to that as well in terms of supporting your ballot measure. And this slide, I think, from our standpoint, is one of the most important. If you look at the group of columns there, the second to right, it says status quo. These are people who want to stick with 3%. You know, they want to keep things just the way they are. They're not willing to consider other options. And again, 3 tests, because we went through public education, we see that number doesn't budge. So they're about 2 in 10, a little fewer than 2 in 10 people among likely voters who will not budge. But you also see that we have for the others strong support. I mean, we can see strong support building after the dark blue there. After the messaging is used, the public education happens, what happens there, and support increases pretty significantly. The highest priority projects, which we also asked about, we asked people to rate in the telephone survey and in the focus groups, what were the highest priority projects? And they're pretty tangible stuff, repairing and upgrading parts of the water system that are oldest, which was a priority for 40%, and they only got 1 vote here, so the 40% is a big number. Ensuring that all households, no matter where they are, have reliable water service during the summer. Second, number 2, 26%, and the third most out of all of the ones that we tested was ensuring there'd be enough water service during and after disasters. I think given Oregon City's history, the priorities of voters are pretty understandable. People know the history. They know this is the oldest city in the West. And so they suspect, even before we tell them, that the city has some 100-year-old pipes. They're not surprised by that exactly. But there are also another 12.6 miles of pipe in the 50 to 100 years category. So past its useful life, needing replacement. And old pipes have got to be replaced in a timely manner or they break. And Patty showed earlier a photograph of a water line break. So again, pipes have been on the ground a while. People understand they need to be replaced. That is the need that they mention most often. We also asked quite a bit about debt, and debt is really interesting. You know, if you ask voters about debt, they typically say, "Oh, I don't believe in debt. We never use debt." And then you say, "Well, what about a mortgage? Do you have yeah, I have a mortgage." "Well, what about a car? You ever buy a car, borrowing money?" "Well, yeah, I do that too." But that's different, isn't it? So we really need to explore that with a conversation almost about debt. So why is it that we use debt? And we did find that there are a lot of reasons, a lot of benefits of debt that resonate with voters. The most important one at the top, and all these ones I'm showing here, at least 2/3 of voters thought these are good reasons that Oregon City should be using debt. And the top one, over 3/4 of the participants thought it was. And the very top one, and I think you'll understand why, is that this would allow Oregon City to apply for low interest federal loans that are now available. So what's been in the news every day, every week, every day, all year, it's the new infrastructure programs that are coming our way and from federal government, and here's a chance to get some of that money. That's not the only message that resonates, but that's the one that proves to be strongest. Other ones that are important are, hey, we can get the projects done faster. These projects have been around for a while. The water pipe in front of my house might fail, so debt would allow us to do that stuff right away and not just do it over time as cash becomes available. And then the things about saving money, different things, there are possibilities here. Hey, the costs aren't going to go down, so if we do it now, it's going to be cheaper in the future. Borrowing funds will result in smaller rate, potentially smaller rate increases, and also finally, it would allow future users to pay a portion of the cost. An example of that is, and I kind of suspect that people are beginning to hear about this. One of the federal programs that is not brand new, it's new in the last 5 years, but not brand new. In fact, several utilities have taken advantage of it in Oregon. It's called the Water Infrastructure Finance Innovation Act. And this is a program that offers very large, very low interest loans at very favorable terms. So you can get a big loan at a interest rate that gets set that is typically like the federal funds rate, like the federal government borrows money, and you don't have to use any of the money, and you don't have to pay any interest on it until you do use it. So you can kind of park it, that approval, if you will. The money's sitting there waiting for you when you need it, but it doesn't cost you anything. And the savings for all of the ones in Oregon there, which have already amounted to $1.6 billion of these loans, what it really boils down to is savings for ratepayers. And I suspect those are the stories that your voters have heard about. You know, I want to get some of that free money, as they would describe it. And the examples there, you know, for the $1 billion projects, Portland's new filtration plant or the Willamette water supply system, the savings for ratepayers are really significant. But also for the city of Sandy. City of Sandy has an $80 million sewer project they need to do in a community of only 12,000. They have no way to do that without a program like WIFIA. And after taking a 98% rate increase last year, sewer rate increase, this year they were able to keep that to 15% and then 6% in future years by using WIFIA funds, making available. They've been accepted, they're in the application process, but again, really substantial savings for ratepayers. Wanted to talk about where things go from here. And so if you could flip another slide there. One of the tools.
Clark?
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight one thing that I wanted just to remind the council is, so our charter doesn't allow us to take on any debt. So that includes taking out this low interest loan, the WIFIA funding. So I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, and WIFIA is a good example because WIFIA has very tight deadlines for applying. So let's say you decided to pursue a WIFIA loan. You would likely not have time to get to the ballot and get approval to take on that debt in time to get your WIFIA loan approved. So it is an impediment to take advantage of any of these federal loan programs. They're almost all the new programs are going to be debt in one form or another rather than outright grants. The keys to success, I want to mention, having worked on a lot of ballot measures over a lot of years, including one Oregon City before, we have developed what we call a success gauge. And these are the factors that we're looking for in predicting your ability to succeed with voters at the ballot. We already know that one of these factors you have got. We've checked it off. That's credibility. We've tested that both in our focus groups and also with you. It was tested in your community survey. We know that voters trust the city as a source of information, which is very important, credible with voters. But other things that we need boil down to an understanding of the need and what's being proposed, you know, clarity about what that is. Why are we doing, what's the value proposition? And then public education and leadership. You know, these to succeed with the money measure, your proposal needs to have the city council behind it to be promoting it. We need to have other community leaders backing this idea in order to have a chance to have voters listen to us long enough to get the message that we have a problem and we have a solution for the problem. So these are the kind of things that we'll be looking at going forward. Ways to get the message out, number of tools. You have good communications infrastructure for the city already, and that all of those mechanisms can be used. In addition, some other more unusual methods that would be needed for ballot measure success. And again, looking back at 2013 and the success, these are the kind of things that were done in 2013. Again, that kind of leadership from elected leaders and making sure that that public education process happens. A final challenge that we have is there's just not a lot of time here. You know, there really only is about 3 months to do public education. That is enough time with a concerted effort to do it. but because people tend to not pay too much attention to this stuff until it gets closer to the election anyway. So you want to be talking to them when they're paying attention about it. But it still is a foreshortened period of time. So, and you can see that this year the November election happens very early on the 2nd. So sometimes it might be almost 2 weeks after that it happens, but it rolls right up 1st of November, 2nd of November this time. So, and again, a challenge that you have in public education. So again, leadership from you and other community leaders, and then public education that happens in this foreshortened timeframe.
Thank you, Clark. I kept the slide up just as a reminder for our schedule. So initially when we came to you in January, I think we talked about coming to you August 4th, and that's the absolute last commission meeting we can come to you with a ballot measure. And so we're pushing to have it before you next week on the 21st. So we put together the ballot measure, and I'll outline what you'll be seeing, but it'll be in your packet and for consideration on the 21st. That builds in a little bit of cushion in case we have anybody that has an issue with it. So just moving ahead. So for the ballot measure, I think Clark has already mentioned that having 2 ballot measures is a risk. So there's a risk that one will pass and one will fail. So one of the things that we talked about is trying to test what the rate would have to be if we didn't have debt approval. So that's part of the reason we tested that 5% initially. And then the other thing is the rates aren't really set until after election. So Matt Zook and I spent many hours trying to figure out if we wanted to run a bazillion different FCS models. And there's so many variables at play. So what we're looking at is moving forward with the rate models that you've already seen, trying to build in some flexibility with the ballot measures, with the understanding that after the vote takes place and we know the results of the election, then we'll be coming back to the city commission, who will be setting the actual rates, but we'll have an opportunity to update our finance model and to give you the information that reflects all the results of the election, as well as I'm hoping, I'm trying to get a letter of interest in for the WIFIA package, which is also due next week. And if we're selected, we would hear like in fall. So that's another piece. So if we have that information and we know that we're eligible, we can factor that in, and then the city commission can make decisions in terms of what rates you want to set moving forward. So the way the ballot measures will be coming forward to you is set up with the rate measure saying not to exceed. What we've done is we've set up 6% for 6 years. And the basis of that is, again, was that the higher interest rate, the 5% was tested, that fared well, 6% did as well. But the rate model assumes that we had like a 20-year window for the 5% increase. And Clark has advised us that that's something that voters are not keen on, right? Temporary is very important. So 6 years is the length of time that the rate model had shown that rate increase for the debt supported model. So that's why that's set. And then the debt measure, Matt spent a lot of time with his folks to make sure that we had the wording clearly so that we could build in authorization to borrow money, but to build in flexibility so that he can look at all the different avenues that are available. And again, we come back with a proposal in terms of what kind of debt we wanted to take on. The amount wouldn't change, it's just how we would borrow the money. And again, that would be coming to you next week. Do you have any questions?
I do.
Yeah, Commissioner O'Donnell.
I want to be sure what we're asking and the clarity of it, because I've seen a lot of percentages floating around. And one report I read said 4 and 5, and now you're proposing 6. And I know that currently we're locked into 3 by law, by what we passed. We're talking about displacing the 3 with, say, a 5 or 6, not a 5 or 6 in addition to the 3. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And it would be a limited term.
Okay. As far as the WIFIA loan piece, we're well familiar with that. Three of us sit on the South Fork Water Board and we explore those frequently. Does that have to be a separate item on the ballot to allow us to pursue that?
No, the way that we've written the debt ballot measure allows us to pursue the WIPIA loan.
Okay. And there was something else. I'm trying to remember what I was going to ask. Oh, we talked about the American Recovery Plan and decided not to use that money elsewhere. Are we talking about possibly applying that money here to reduce the burden on our taxpayers?
Correct. And I talked to Matt Zook about that. Our sense is that right now, yes, it'll help, but we also have inflationary costs that we're seeing with construction that are higher than what the rate model currently has. So again, we want to rerun the model once we have the results of the election and factor all of that in and come back to the commission with a fine-tuned, I guess, rate model that we could move forward with. And that would reflect the ARPA money.
It would reflect it. Okay.
Yes.
And the proposal that you're going to put on the ballot is going to state a specific percentage that you're seeking approval for and a time period?
Correct. Up to 6% and for 6 years.
Well, all anybody's going to see is 6% in 6 years. Forget the up to.
That's where Clark's helping with the messaging.
Okay, thanks.
Just to clarify, the way that we're writing the ballot measures allows us the most flexibility on debt options, whether that be a WIFIA loan, revenue bonds, but it does exclude general obligation bonds because that measure needs to be written more precisely because it's essentially guaranteeing with tax revenue. So that would be the one debt option that wouldn't be available as we're proposing it because it can't, if it's going to be a GO bond, it's got to be a GO bond. The way we're writing it gets us everything other than that option because we felt like the flexibility related to the debt options made more sense.
And does it assure the voting population that after this specific time period of an elevated rate, that it does return to, we would honor the 3% in the future?
Yeah, we're
Correct.
not changing the charter. We're replacing it for the time period as proposed.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Tony.
Commissioner McGurk?
So just to follow up on Mr. O'Donnell's comment, so it's being suggested that we are basically doubling the rate that we currently have or not?
It would be up to and for only 6 years.
Okay, so right now, I don't know, I don't know what the rate is at this moment, but we can only go, so let's say the rate is 3, so we can only go 3% more to that. But so we're saying we've got whatever it is today, we'd add 6% on top of that, is that?
No, so, and that's
Okay,
a
yes,
good
so
point. We'll
clarify.
need to consider that when we message it. For instance, instead of raising it 3%, we would raise it 6%.
So it's a net 3.
Yeah, that needs to be clear to a total of.
So if it's $1 and we add 6%,
$1.06.
Yeah,
Okay.
so instead of our 3% limitation, so if this failed, we'd go to $1.03. If this passed, we'd go to $1.06.
okay, yeah, I think it's really clear to explain what the rate is, what we have, the rate is now, and then what the addition is, because when I was trying to explain that today at a meeting, it was like, it just went.
So really, it's a 3% increase because we would most likely, I would imagine, continue to institute the 3%
3%.
max required by the charter. So really the impact financially is an additional 3%.
Are we gonna be telling people that as well? Are we're gonna continue to do that, or we're taking the rate we have now and adding the percentage to it?
I think that this is really good information. Obviously, we're really in the weeds on this, so it's good to hear what the lack of clarity is from the commissioners. So we can go back and try and figure out how to say that more precisely.
So I will say that in the past, I've always asked about, we do these surveys, and I have a hard time with them sometimes because I don't even know somebody that knows somebody that did one. I got a telephone survey, And I wasn't exactly sure what it was when it came through, but it was pretty generic. So I answered it. And then when I got into the first question, I said, oh, it's the water rate survey. So obviously I answered all the questions in a positive manner, knowing what I knew at the time. And I think I said that I thought that people did not understand the need that we had. And so I was thinking of, because Clark, I live in the McLaughlin neighborhood, which has, I might have one of those 100-year-old pipes at my house. My house is 109 years old. And I know when we dug up our sewer pipe, it was still made out of wood. And that was very frightening for me from a personal liability standpoint. But I think people in the older neighborhoods have more clarity about what's really happening. And I think some of the things that we've seen in the last year, particularly water pipes bursting and then streets collapsing. I mean, I'm not saying that could happen here, but you never know. Mm-hmm. We are at risk at this point in time in our community of having multiple failures, and I don't think anybody wants to see that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to ask my question real quick. So in the staff report, you mentioned that the city commission recommended a 4% annual increase for 6 years. And I'm trying to figure out why now it's percent when that wasn't what the city commission selected.
Agreed.
So, and again, advise as you'd like to proceed. So that reflected a debt funded model. And why the change is because there's a risk in separating these into two ballot measures that we may not be approved to take on debt. And so then that would mean to fund the capital improvements that we would have to have a higher rate increase. And that's why we tested the 5%. So the rate model showed a 5% without a debt, but it also showed 5% for 20 years. And what Barney Worth has advised is people are not receptive to 20-year increase. That's basically, I think Clark said infinity. So, giving them a limited term is important. And so I literally chose 6 years because the rate model had that 4% for 6 years. As for the 6% amount, we don't have anything that would say that we have to go that high, but again, we didn't spend the money to run the models at this point. There's so many variables. And the sense was, in talking with Matt Zook, is that between the increased cost that we have because of inflation, right, combined with shortening the length of time that we're talking about an increase, if the debt option didn't go, that we'd need a little bit higher rate. So it was our best professional judgment. You're not obligated to it. It's just an up to. And again, we're talking not a lot of difference. So I just want to, that was one thing that I think, and Clark, you can chime in, but when we talked to the focus groups and they actually saw the differences between, a percentage, it's not a huge difference. And so I guess the thought is to go ahead and ask for the up to, right, 6%, and know that you do not have to adopt that. You do not have to put into place a rate increase that is 6%. You have a choice. But this provides you some flexibility.
So we're hedging our bets in case one of the ballot measures fails, the debt ballot measure fails.
Correct.
Okay. Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, I just had one more question. Somebody had made a comment today to me that we have the highest water rates in the region. And I said, I don't think that is true.
Yeah.
No, and I don't have that slide available. We did talk about that when FCS came and did the rate model and presented that. We are not the most expensive, and I can bring that back next week when we're talking if you want to look at that.
I would really like to refute that comment.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell?
I think it's dangerous to the success of this measure to do that up to. I mean, anybody, they're just going to see 6. They're not going to see anything else. And I really agree with the gentleman who presented. I think you should state it in terms of real dollars, because if people see percentages, all they see is, God, they're doubling it. And the real dollar piece is more meaningful. So I certainly agree with them there. I also agree with the mayor, which is the reason for my immediate question. Everything I saw was 4% and 5%, and now I'm seeing 6. So
Mhm,
I'm at some point, people are going to balk.
mhm.
Maybe it's better to get 5 than not get 6. So you think about it. That's strategy. I don't know.
And then
Thanks.
next week, if that's the direction the commission wanted to go, I mean, we could, I presume that we could make that change at the meeting, but right now, what you'll see in your packet is the 6 and 6.
Well, I also think you have to show them the impact over the life of the increase. That the first year it's this, the second year you'll be paying this, and the third year that. And I think, or whatever number of years you're going to run it, because I don't want people to feel that they've been tricked.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'm interested to see your narrative of how you're kind of linking these 2 ballot measures for success. But anyway, I don't see any more hands, so we still have another considerable item on the agenda. So I'd like to move on, I think.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think
thank you. I'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you, Pat. Mr. Worth, it was a good presentation.
Thank you.
All right, so
Oh, man, I'd like to say, so before I forget, we talked about some of these issues, and I want to make sure I'm real sensitive to missing deadlines and publication dates. So this thing we talked about, geologic hazards, do we need to publish the agenda as early as tomorrow to get our everything for the next meeting so that we're on task?
Yeah, we always put the commission agenda out on Wednesday.
Okay, so it'll be on there and we'll be safe. We won't miss a deadline date for time period. All right, thanks.
Okay. All right, so item number 4 is resolution number 21-38, cross street banners and streetlight pole banners. We actually received a presentation on this a long time ago, but it never came to the city commission for passing, so we need another work session on it. So we also have a new commissioner who wasn't here when we heard this before. So Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Let's see, let me share my screen here and see if I can't make this work. Are you seeing my PowerPoint slide? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
You thumbs up. You probably can't see our video. Yes.
Yeah, I can, but I gotta adjust all my screens here, so
Yeah, no, you're
apologize
good.
for that. Okay, well, again, thank you for taking the time to take on this topic. Yes, it's been a while since we brought this before you. We've had a lot of other initiatives, and this cross street banner or streetlight banner and cross street banner policy is kind of been sitting on the back burner. So I'm going to go ahead and go through it real quick. Got just a few slides. So, we've got a policy, but we've also got the Oregon City Municipal Code, and the Oregon City Municipal Code includes provisions for banners, and it definitely helps to inform the policy. Some of you, and I think Rocky, maybe Commissioner McGriff and Commissioner Smith, right, remember Fran Schaefer. We've had a banner hanging program for a long time. When I came to work here, it was an active program as well. We had banners that hung over 99E at the time, and I used to tease Fran about being the banner queen because she did all that work with banners. And so a lot of that was, information that she kept and tracked, but we didn't really have a policy around it. So we started a policy, and we initiated that policy really before it was even adopted in 2015. So the 2015 policy has worked. It's a little restrictive, and I'll go through that a little bit, but really the banners are available to the community for just, really just ways to share about events and programs and et cetera. But that policy is really most driven by your code. And then there's the details of, what size banner and how it's constructed and how long you can have it up, those kind of things. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we currently have 4 different banners in place around the city. 4 different banner zones, I said, around the city. And we've also got 4 different banners currently up, and I thought I'd just share that. Farmers Market has been the single most regular user and also most compliant user. But in years past, I think COVID has kind of put the kibosh to a lot of the banner attention, and so it's kind of slowed down. But we've continued to maintain a couple of banners that have been up for much longer than our policy provides for, but they're the Oregon City 75th anniversary, the Main Street Award, and then some Welcome Oregon City hometown banners as well. So uses vary. I mean, these banners typically, we spoke to the high school about graduation time and actually brought to you a provision that would waive their fees for that. They backed out of that idea, but the types of banners we see can vary from something more individualized to something much more themed, something more along the lines of what we see with the Welcome to Oregon City's hometown banners. And again, we manage the program through the operations, and our transportation maintenance manager, he's got most of the details of that program at his fingertips. So my next slide, just kind of wanted you to know that we've got four kind of general areas. We've got a overall citywide, and this doesn't count some of the new stuff that we're building along Malala Avenue, but 149 streetlight banner locations. And then the new banner location on Malala, it is the one cross street banner that we have available. So we also had in our program for a few years now, we've been using some mapping of all those locations, and it's something that our transportation maintenance manager can use to actually document, where they're putting up the banners, so that they can share that both with the applicant, and we can keep track of it, where the banners are going up, what particular banner it is, and then what the removal deadline is. So we use those. Currently, they're updated as banners change. Again, all that's done at operations. So let's see. Sorry. We heard from the city commission last time, and I think I've got these correct. Some of that was from Recollect and some of it's from notes, comparing notes with staff, but there was a lot of inconsistencies and nomenclature and grammar changes. So we've kind of gone through that. I think we've got most of those fixed. We had some concerns for single user monopolizing on the streetlight banner locations for too long and for too many banners. Our current banner has some time frame limitations, which I'll go through as well. But right now we're proposing longer than what we have in the current banner program, but less than what we presented at our last work session. So we think we're hitting that sweet spot, just keeping in mind the kind of timeframes that we need and to manage those banners, and the applicants who pay to have these banners made invest a fair amount of money in them, and there's a fair amount of costs that they pay as a fee, unless we're waiving that fee to put the banners up and down. So anyway, but in this case, we've suggested that streetlight banners could be up as long as 4 months, with extension to that if we don't have another applicant that's kind of bearing down, asking to be on that same location. We've also limited the number of streetlight banners allowed by one applicant to 20 banners. So we would, based on what we've seen in our experience, we would never have enough applicants to fill up all of our banner locations. And then we also addressed the cross street banners in this in these proposed changes. Got rid of the ODOT and PGE locations, and we've added the Malala Avenue location. And that's, if you haven't seen it, it's near Chard Des Drive there on Malala Avenue. And then I also included some language that kind of allowed provisions. When we designed Malala Avenue and we got the grant money for the banner location on this project site, we asked the designer to come up with a kind of a generic design, so that if they're, because we have talked a little bit about a few other banners, one on Beaver Creek Road near the farmers market, and then trying to build something closer down towards where our old PGE location, which was at Beverly. So, rather than, so I've added those. And the way the language reads that any future locations established by the city. So, there's an approval process that would happen there as well. And then there were some other needs. We needed to make some justification or some changes for banner construction. We wanted to provide a little more flexibility than just a standard applicant for things that, my kind of reading between the lines for economic development and tourism. They're likely to be big users of some of these banner locations. We talked to James a little bit about that. So I just want to make sure that we've got some flexibility there, and I think we can still accommodate that.
Keep trying to water that.
So we've added some language there. We've updated the application and the maps and photos. We've referenced the fee schedule rather than listing a fee, and the city's got an insurance requirement of $2 million, which seems a little high, but that's where we're at with that. And and then we've updated the resolution, which we plan to bring back to you in August, first meeting in August. So with that, I hope I've covered everything that was concerning. In your packet, I included also kind of the red line version. I just would say I feel pretty confident in that. We had a bunch of different versions of that policy in our electronic files. So I tried to take the one that was adopted with the 2015 resolution, and had the administrative staff compare that to the latest version and show all those red lines, because there was too many different fingers in it and too many different versions. So that's what should be in your packet. And then there's also a summary sheet in your packet of these changes. So I'm here to answer any questions and make sure we've got anything else, or if there's anything else that you would like to see that we can add that and bring it back in August, early August.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lewis. Commissioner McGriff.
So I presume I haven't been to Windsor lately, so I haven't been down this far. So this is where the cross street banner is, the one that was approved through Metro Enhancement.
It is. This is
this is
yep.
the location. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So talk to me, or talk to us about the increase in the insurance. I don't know how easy it is or how difficult, other than having to apply for not a waiver, but a rider on an insurance policy for an organization that I did. And why the change?
Yeah, and I apologize. I dug into that a little bit before this work session, because I knew that was going to be an issue. The answer I got was, $2 million's the minimum, but they were going to look and go back and talk to our insurance contact. And I don't have an answer for that, but my hope is that we can get to something that's a little, because I know one, I think we need the insurance, especially in particular for the cross street banners. Whether we need the 2 million or a million is a question. The street light banners have a lot less, or the street light pole banners have a lot less liability associated with them because they're just a small banner. This banner here, you know, if it comes down and somebody, you know, it's got more liability associated with that. And I
So
think,
if it comes down and blocks a vision on somebody's car and they have a wreck, or, I mean, is that kind of what you're
yes,
anticipating?
So-
or-
yes.
Okay, so what other scenario might occur that would require that kind of liability?
Well,
I mean, I'm just asking, because
I suppose there's, you know, potential for failure of the support system itself as opposed to just the banner, but you know, that should be covered under our own insurance policy. So it's really, we've always had an insurance requirement. It's just been $1 million.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting we don't have one. I'm just questioning the major increase.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I'd like to just suggest to you that I'm also attentive to that and hoping to get an answer. I just didn't have it in time for tonight. So I'd like, when we bring it back in August, I'll have the real number there.
So just to be clear on that insurance piece as a follow-on, so the applicant is only providing the banner, the wires and the support and all of that, and the poles are obviously provided by the city, correct?
That's correct.
So they need $2 million of insurance for a banner when the wiring and the majority of the other structure is on us.
Right. Usually the failure is with the banner.
Okay. Commissioner Smith.
I don't have an issue with the insurance, although I do question the increase. I kind of looked up what average would be the difference between someone that what someone would have to pay to increase their insurance from $1 million to 2 million, and it's pretty, it could be within $100 to do that. $75 to $100 on average, and as you increase, but so I guess I'm not opposed to it raising if we figure that that's the need, or maybe it's the $1 million for the light pole banners and a $2 million for the cross street banner or something like that. But I guess one of my was downtown and the farmers market involved in this conversation in terms of the changes on the insurance and then changes in the number of banners.
Well, not recently. And, we took a fresh look at this after that last commission meeting. So, no, not, especially not on the insurance, because the insurance is kind of an internal number, and it's really just trying to scrutinize that. And I should have done that sooner. So
part of let's go, I guess. There's a frequent turnover in designs of banners. I would love to be able to see Oregon City have, a set amount of poles on the entrances to the city that are specifically for Oregon City branding, that we put banners up on a regular basis that exceed a year and are consistent. Because I can just from your photographs, in the last 5 years, we probably had 5 different Oregon City banners, and then they fall down, and one's, so now we have a couple different ones. I would love to be, and maybe this is not the time yet, but once we get some of these projects done, and I would love to see some of the entries to like 213 and Malala, like let's say the first, 5 poles are like designated as this is the city entranceway for these city sanctioned, either downtown sponsored or Oregon City branding, and then event banners kind of fall in those other places so that we can have some consistency to it. And then people would kind of get used to where the interchanging event banners are versus the actual kind of entryways. But that's a dream world I get at some point. I guess the other point would be if in general, we have about 3 or 4 users of the, you know, even since in the last, you know, 5 years, we've had, you know, within 3 or 4 users of the banner system. And I guess, you know, if the farmers market, which is one of the main users, you know, I would rather them go beyond 20 banners than have empty banner poles, you know, if no one else is using them. So I guess, you know, obviously you can't kind of dictate that every year because it might be more events as the, you know, the summer events start up or even next year. So I guess I'm, you know, worried about doing such a limit if, you know, there's only one user or 2 or 3 users and, you know, we limit them to 20 and then, you know, half of our banners are empty, half of our banner poles are empty. So I think we should be a little flexible on that. And so then can I also assume that all of our city banners that have been up for now over a year are going to come down and be empty? So all of our, you know, the downtown hometown ones and the Oregon City 175 ones are all going to come down now?
Well, that was the thing that I was struggling with a little bit is there's these scenarios whereby you've got no competition for these banner locations. So in situations like that, we'd like that flexibility to be able to, maintain banners as long as they're in good condition and we don't have a replacement for them and we don't have a demand by another user, then our practice has been to continue to utilize those. But this, having a written policy then means you're either not following your policy or you're writing it in ranges that don't work when you've got more demand, right? So and I guess to me the thing that's a little bit challenging here is we've got this policy and it helps staff in their ability to monitor it, but we've never had a problem where we had too much demand for these banners, right? Or these banner arms. This question, your point about entryways and trying to, preserve those for, I know, again, James has been talking with some great ideas about, how to showcase our entryways. And I think with this banner policy, we've got that kind of flexibility and we can still administer it in a way that the other users, at least the typical users that we have, would be pleased. So
I would, at some point having a conversation that, city owned, kind of identity banners for entryways might be something that is added to the flower basket program or some way to deal with those as a conversation later. But let's see what else I had to say. I just would like to see some consistency of our kind of branding with downtown and the city when we put banners up, and hopefully not, just changing them every year. But if we do implement this, it clearly states no banner will be up for over a year. So that includes our own. So we have to be consistent with that. The other thing I'm going to mention tonight, which is not this topic for tonight, but we probably have, and I want to make it my summer project to photograph how many different style light poles that we have in this town. And I am kind of aggravated by it because I asked about this when we started the Malala Avenue project. And if you look at Malala Avenue, we have now installed another totally different design light posts. So they're completely different on either side. I believe that there's probably no less than 6 to 8 different styles of light posts on our city streets. And I hope that we're trying to consolidate them and get them to be similar. I've brought this up multiple times and kind of assured that, but it's not happening. And so it just adds to this, we kind of randomly putting up all sorts of different light posts all around the town, and they're not consistent at all.
I've heard that, and I appreciate that, Commissioner Smith. I wish, because it's also helpful on ownership and operation end of things to have consistency as well. Keep in mind, we've got, I would say, when was Main Street first redone? I want to say 30 years, maybe a little less, 25 years of.
John, we adopted a sidewalk section design plan so that we would be consistent every time we implement a block. And so just even that new development that went in with the urgent care, they have one single light pole that they added to Malala that's completely different than everything else on that street. So we had a plan so that when we did block by block of Malala Avenue, that they would match the design block of the sidewalks, the seating, and the, am I wrong in that? I mean, I remember this conversation years ago that we did that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we got off.
So we do work hard to follow those design standards. I would just say when it comes to streetlights, we don't have a city cast light, right? We still rely on the lighting industry to produce lights, and they change their styles. They change their lighting styles. So, and then you add in this LED lighting requirement. So right now we have two standards for the globes themselves, and we're trying to transition those to the same standard, but they're fairly expensive. So, we've got a limited budget on that, and we're trying to get to that standardization, but we've got very little control over the companies that do the castings for these poles, or the manufacturers that build the globe itself. And so I'm not sure that without a custom build and having it working with a manufacturer to build an Oregon City specific, I don't even think they will do that. So that's been our challenge. We've heard that. We want it too. We want consistency, but that's the best I can tell you.
All right, Commissioner Morrow.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm curious if there has been a continuing conversation with the Gaffney Lane Neighborhood Association about their concerns that they had relayed about the Malala Avenue banner, and if so, what those conversations have been like.
Let me step without stepping into it too deep on that topic. When we were pursuing the street project design, one of the thoughts that came up was we had seen kind of an artist rendition of this banner system, and so we tried to figure out how we could incorporate that. We were struggling to get that in the use the funding that we had for that kind of a project. So we went with a grant through Metro Enhancement Grant to get these funded, and we made a call out to the neighborhood about their interest in sponsorship. And it wasn't my conversation; it was another person's conversation about their interest in sponsoring, and that they weren't necessarily. We also reached out to others in the community, Business Alliance, the Chamber, the Farmers Market, etc. So we heard pretty strong support, with the exception of the neighborhood, and we asked them if they would sponsor by being the applicant for the enhancement grant, and they turned that down. And we understood that, but we also heard a fair amount of support for the banner, and we think it's a good addition for the city. There's a lot of demand for it. We have tried, and I say we've used our project manager for this to kind of reach out and check in with the neighborhood. They just flat out disagree that should be there, and so we're kind of at that spot where we feel like it should be there. We're pretty far down the road in terms of purchase of the banner and the design work on it, and we know there's community support beyond the neighborhood. So we're at an impasse And I don't think we're going to convince them to see that banner any differently. I hope over time they'll see the value to it, because I think there will be a lot of community value to this banner. But yeah, I know there's a difference there. And so.
Thank you. And yeah, that's something that came to mind because I think that was one of the first emails that I got for public comment after I came aboard. And so that was riding high on my mind there. And then the other one, kind of getting to what Commissioner Smith was saying is, as far as like retention and how often would you say it's the case that someone uses their extension and then nobody wants to use the banner and then it's just vacant?
Well, under normal conditions, you know, I would say we can accommodate a lot. There's just, you know, somebody may really want a banner location. I think the time that I remember when Main Street was its most active, I remember Jonathan Stone had 2 or 3 different kind of banner messages that he wanted up. And then we had the farmer's market, and I want to see, there was a city banner as well. And at that point in time, you know, Main Street can get saturated pretty quick. But if we can disperse them citywide and think about what we have on Washington Street now, you know, what we have on Malala and what we have on 7th, we even got banner locations on 99E. So we should be able to get that message out. Some of the banners designs, if they're meant for a pedestrian reader versus a vehicle reader, then we kind of have to put them on Main Street versus a Highway 99 kind of a scenario. So we got to watch that a little bit. But I don't recall a time when we haven't been able to work with, and I want to give a lot of credit to Jason Thornburg. He's definitely trying to please everybody in the room when it comes to that. And especially with the mapping, it just makes it a heck of a lot easier. We didn't have that back in that day. We should have, but we didn't have those maps produced. And now we have all these locations. So we can really sit down with the applicant and really kind of say, well, here's the 3 other banners that are out there. And if their time is due and somebody wants that, we would follow the policy and move them, you know. Does that answer your question?
I was getting more at like how often you see it where the extension is used and then you don't see any more applicants and then it's just vacant and there's nothing in the poll. How often you would see that happening?
Fairly often. More often than not. Then it goes the other way that I was describing.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Well, it's not a hot button issue for me, and I don't have a lot of familiarity with it. What I don't want, I agree with maybe all of what Commissioner Smith said. I don't want Oregon City looking like some seedy used car lot with jillions of banners either. But I was more curious about what our experience has been with prolonged. I mean, there's this deal where you rent it for 4 months and then you have the option to renew for 4 months, and so you could have your banner up there for a year. Does that even happen?
We've got banners that have been up there a couple of years now. So normally not with applicants like farmers market or soccer or those types of applicants. It's more kind of our own, or maybe what DOCA's got going on, or the chamber may have a message from time to time, but normally no, it's not the norm. We've got these anniversary banners up, and like I said, if there's not a demand, they're still a good looking banner. They don't look all ripped up in most cases. So our position's been to just leave them up there.
So I may have missed it in the reading. Is there a provision that the banner has to be kept in good repair and not ragged and looking?
Yes.
Okay. As I said, I don't have a lot to say about it if it's properly managed. Others like Commissioner Smith have much more experience. I'll defer to him. Thanks.
All right. So I have a few comments and some questions. First, I agree with Commissioner Smith. I really love the idea of having a couple of designated spots that are for the city, or the entrances to our main corridors that we can use. I know the policy currently says that or the proposed code says city-sponsored community enhancement, tourism, or economic development program banners will be given precedence in display decisions. So I think, John, that's what you were referring to, is that the city has some preference or some flexibility there to kind of say, these are the locations we want. And so maybe that would be sufficient. I would love for our economic development or tourism department to give that some thought as to, how do these fit into our tourism program, and, be proactive about those specific locations. We have the flexibility in the code, so I think there's an opportunity there, and I totally agree with Commissioner Smith on that one. I don't understand the insurance increase, and it seems to apply the same dollar amount for street light pole banners as it does for cross street banners. So I don't understand that. I think I need more information as to why we're applying a $2 million insurance requirement to, say, someone like the farmer's market. Equally, I don't think the liability is the same. That item just doesn't make sense to me logically. So if you can come back with some good information, or maybe potentially change that, I'd be interested in that conversation. I see, Tony, you have your hand up. You want to address that now?
Yeah, and I think we need to confirm this, but we believe that that's the maximum amount that the city can be sued, is the 2 million. So then it puts all the liability on the user, release, as coverage for any accident that would occur. It's tied to the city's liability.
Okay. I'm hoping that, I know when we reviewed this policy before, we did get public comment from the farmer's market, and I think we did from DOCA. Granted, this was a while ago, so I'm hoping that we can reach out to them and get some input from them on this policy as well. I think it would be good to have their input. I see references to locations in both the policy and in the code. And in the code, we struck out specific location areas that we were talking about, and we just and so I don't see a map of the banner. I don't know how anybody would know like where the locations are that they have to choose from. And so it feels like this mysterious piece of information that if you want to find it out, I guess you have to go to the city and find out where the banner locations are. I'm wondering if we could you've removed the details out of the code, so I'm wondering what's the replacement for that?
That's a good question. So I forgot to mention, we've got a banner web page, which has all that map that I showed is just a kind of a screenshot of an example. We've got, I want to say 10 or 12 kind of sectioned out maps of these areas that's available for the public to look at, bring in if they want to make copies of, or we can just bring them up and talk to them on them. So that's kind of how we are managing the locations.
Okay. I guess I'll have to check that out. And then the cross street banners, I find it interesting that we've only picked one location, and I know that was for the Malala project. So what's the future process? Like if, say, the farmers market comes in, or maybe First City Celebration, and they want to put a banner on Main Street, or they want to put a banner on Beaver Creek Road, what's the process for the cross street banners? It seems very open right now to me of that future sites. Can you explain that?
Sure. I don't know. Am I still sharing screen by any chance?
You are.
So that's the map excerpt that I'm kind of referring to. There's several of those that show different areas of town. And then I'm going to stop sharing so that I can figure out how to. I don't think we need that anymore. Sorry. So while we haven't talked much about future banner locations, keep in mind that you don't just hang up a banner across the public roadway. We would be there'd be an investment in another structure, whether it be exactly like the one that we have or something different, but we got the foundation design for that works for a pretty wide facility. So the process would come back to the city commission to make a determination on whether or not they would support a project like that. Typically, we wouldn't be spending transportation dollars on that kind of a facility. It's more likely another grant, or if there was, I suppose, if there was a private funder that wanted to fund them, then we'd probably have an agreement that would have to come to the city commission. So we've never had a, this is our first installation that we've done. The other ones that I recall have been on 99E, which were ODOT facilities, and then PGE years ago had a couple of power poles that were established, and they allowed that to happen, but they're not allowing that anymore. So I don't have a process, and I think I'd like to see more. I think the community would like to see more, but I mean, given the reaction that we've had to some of the one on Malala, I probably want to have a process. But I think maybe establishing that when we have a funding mechanism.
Okay, so the issue is that the infrastructure isn't in place on all of the street poles to allow banners. It requires special poles, and that infrastructure isn't available without some funding and some thought process. So folks aren't just going to come up and say, "Hey, I want to hang a banner across Malala around Grocery Outlet because I think that's a great location." That's probably not a feasible. That's not going to happen.
Right. I mean, again, if DOCA came forward and said, we'd like to hang banners across the right of way from building to building, we'd have to figure that out. And we'd have to, it'd be a right of way issue. It'd be different than what we're used to dealing with. So
Okay. And then I guess the last thing the comment I have is about the Gaffney Lane neighborhood. That's actually my neighborhood that I live in. I know that they were essentially, some folks in the neighborhood were essentially opposed to the cross street banner, I think from day one on, when the Malala Avenue project was going through its 30% and 60% design, and we had all of those meetings. The neighborhood voiced some opposition to that. And like I said, it's my neighborhood. I live in that neighborhood. I'll probably make some people upset with this comment, but I actually don't agree with the neighborhood trying to assert what they want for a neighborhood onto Malala Avenue, which I think is a primary corridor for the city. And in that sense, I have to think about the city as a whole. And I'm sympathetic to the neighborhood, but this is the case where you're going to see, are we making decisions on behalf of the city versus what a particular neighborhood wants? This could be Malala, or this could be McLaughlin neighborhood complaining about something on Malala or by the library or something. Same kind of thing. We would have to make that decision of input from the community. Is this best for the community? And it happens. We have disagreements. It is unfortunate, but I do see Malala Avenue as a primary thoroughfare and entranceway into the city, and therefore I feel like it is a good location for a cross street banner, or if we're building the art at the entrance of that Malala in 213, kind of welcoming people into Oregon City. I think it's just the start of that, of branding our city, and Malala Avenue is one of those corridors that I think, along with what Commissioner Smith said, there's tourism, there's things that we should be doing in our city. I think art's going to come into play, where Malala Avenue is just one of those main thoroughfares that we should be considering these things. So it's unfortunate that there is this disagreement between what the Gaffney Lane Neighborhood Association, they generally just didn't support it. They're concerned about safety. I think we've written into this policy that if there's any safety concerns, that those banners come down. So I think after this one goes up, we should be really having our ears to the ground to find out if anybody has any problems. Are there rear end crashes happening because people are reading the cross street banner, not following, not paying attention to traffic? So I think we should be sensitive to that, because that was one of what Gaffney Lane Neighborhood Association was concerned about, because it is a busy area of Malala. So I think rightfully so, we should be concerned and be paying attention to that area for safety, for pedestrian safety and for cars. And, it's new. So yeah, let's do our due diligence and make sure that we're paying attention to those things. So with that, I'll stop there. So I think your plan, John, is to bring this to the city commission at our next meeting. Is that right?
Let's see, I'm trying to, I don't believe I'm ready for the 21st. I've got a lot of things on the agenda, but I don't think this was one of them. But the 4th of August. And so just to recap a little bit of what I heard, okay with some of the flexibility. There's a little bit of concern around, recognizing that banners stay up longer than a year. How do we deal with that? So dealing with longer term banners. So trying to figure out a way to work that in there. Designating entry, banners. We could do that on those maps, I suppose, as well. And we could work with James and his team to kind of establish the cream of the crop there when it comes to the city's entryways. Happy to do that. Definitely looking at the insurance requirements and trying to figure out if there's any workarounds for that, in particular, the street light banners, and trying to circle back with Farmers Market and DOCA. I had a couple staff working on this. I'm not certain how much involvement there's been, but I want to say there's some, but we'll circle back on that as well. But yeah, we'll try to do all that with all the other things that we're trying to get to the commission by the 4th.
Yeah, you got a busy schedule. Commissioner McGriff.
John, we didn't really talk about what the insurance requirement is for the streetlight banners. You said that it was some reasonable fee, so I don't know what that is. Do you know what that is right off the top of your head, or you have it on your document somewhere, or?
For the insurance requirement, it's the same, and it's currently the same requirement. So we don't have different levels. I'm looking into that though, because to me it seems like the cross banner.
They are different.
Yeah.
The ones on the light poles are not going across any street. Seems to be there should be some difference because of the less risk.
Yeah. And I gotta agree, but I'm no insurance guy, so I gotta talk
I'm not either.
Patrick and the risk assessment team to figure out if we can. Yeah.
I mean, I understand what Manager Conkle was saying about the city's liability. I think we're working with a lot of nonprofits or, our groups. I just kind of want to meet in the middle somewhere if possible, but.
Yeah.
All right. So.
Thank you.
Yes, it is getting late, and the last item on our agenda is communication. So City Manager Conkle, do you have something for us? Thank you, John.
I do not. No, not tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. So we're doing our commission committee.
I don't want to do any reports.
We have a ton of committees. And so I know the last meeting, we kind of skipped over this and was just kind of like, if anybody has anything primary that you want to report out on, that the city commission should be aware of, now would be we want to do that or run through. I would kind of like to streamline this, and let's just say if you have any primary communications. Okay, I see thumbs up.
Streamline, yeah.
My back is about ready to give out. I cannot sit down anymore. So
yeah, I agree with you on that. So I'm willing to punt on any of my communications until our next city commission meeting.
I'm willing to punt because there's nothing super exciting going on. We already did the 2040 stuff, so that's one of the committees. Everything else is no. I don't have anything to report.
Yeah, I am going to give. Yeah, I just to let you know, I am signed up to give public comment at the Transportation Commission on Thursday morning to try to ensure we get funding for the I-205 seismic improvements to the Abernathy Bridge. So that's public comment to that Transportation Commission. So just trying to keep that project moving forward.
When are you going to find out about the lots? They did get some money from the legislature, which is really good. Very exciting.
Yes, they did get funding and as far as I know, things are moving forward. I've gotten an email on it, but it was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I saw Russ Axelrod, and the only thing he said was that now they're continuing to hold the Corps' feet to the fire because they have a lot of maintenance that they have to do on this facility. And they said that they're gonna try to find additional funding, which that's not good enough.
Yeah. Mr. Lewis, you have a hand raised comment?
Just real quick, Clack Connect started this week, and I want to say yesterday started. And you know, that's an important program to be successful. I think. I know it's grant driven, and they'll probably run it if there's not a lot of people on it for a while. But it's important that the community hop on and use that system because if it's not successful, I'm not quite sure what happens.
Yeah, that's commonly referred to as the last mile shuttle that we launched last week. So
how are they getting the word out about it?
It's a bit of a soft roll for now because they didn't want to be too successful, so they're kind of soft rolling it out for now. But I guess I don't have a good answer for you right now, Commissioner McGriff, because I don't know the specifics, but I know they're going to heighten that, and Kristen's been doing a good job of posting that as well.
Seems to me they could be out at those stops, having public people's handing out information to make it obvious that there's a stop there. That just, yeah.
Okay, yeah, a couple of funding things that came out for Clackamas County that you should probably be aware of since you mentioned the locks. Clackamas County did get $94 million for the courthouse project, so that is moving forward. They also got $100,000 for a mobile health van for Clackamas County, so I think our residents could probably benefit from that health van. I'm sure we'll learn more about that as that moves forward. Also, just for our economic development team, one of the bills in the legislature established a broadband fund, and we are expecting grant opportunities to be available. And so that should tee up nicely with our biennial work plan that I just learned about, that there was House Bill 5006 that established that fund, and we are expecting grant opportunities for that. My ears kind of perked up for that with our broadband work. So Tony, if James Graham or his staff isn't aware of that, it may be worth a look. Just to keep their eyes open for some broadband grant opportunities there. So, oh, I see. Great. Oh, there you are, James, giving the thumbs up. Okay. All right. So I don't see any more hands or comments. So I think we're all exhausted, and we should go home or in. So we're already at home. So we're gonna adjourn this meeting. Y'all have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.